My name is Alka. I'm a sub-editor with the TheDropTimes. I've been working with the TheDropTimes for over a year now. So first question is obviously about the beginning of talking Drupal. So I would like to hear the version of your story. Stephen had a version of his own.
Yeah,
So
sure. So, yeah, man, it's been 12 years, I think. So I met Steven at a Drupal camp.
mhm.
Oh no, that's not true. No, I met Steven. I probably met him at a Drupal camp, but I don't remember that. um, I met him at a boot camp he put on with John about responsive web design
Uh-huh.
and in person for the first time. And before that, I had heard he was putting on he had a web design book club. And so I joined that book club. So we would read a book about web design, and each week we would meet for, I think, an hour and talk about what we had read that week. So a typical book club, but instead of like fiction or nonfiction, it was web design related stuff. And after I had been in that club and met him in person at the camp, at the boot camp, Stephen approached me and said, "Hey, I was thinking of doing a podcast. Would you be interested in joining?" And at the time, podcasts really weren't super popular yet, right? Think
Yeah.
like Serial hadn't happened yet. Like none of the big podcasts had happened. So I was like, I was a little curious about it. I thought, sure, why not? It could be fun. And I think he had told me it would be pretty low pressure, just like, the book club. We would just kind of chat and talk about things Drupal. And so I said, sure, why not? And I think at the time, I didn't expect it to go this far, right? I mean, who expects 12 years and,
Yeah.
500 episodes? But yeah, I figured it would be a fun little experiment. I thought I'd go for a couple months and then we'd regroup and see what happens. And I don't know, we just kind of took off from there.
That's nice. So, have you listened to podcasts before this? Do you have any experience? Were you interested in listening to podcasts, anything of that sort?
Not at all. Like I said, so this would have been 2013. Podcasts really weren't big. I don't think I had listened to a single podcast before this, before I started started one with Steven. Um, I mean, it wasn't even after being on the show. It took probably another year or two before I started listening to podcasts myself.
I see.
Um, beyond sometimes listening to the one that I was on. Um, yeah, no, I didn't really know too much about podcasts, but the thing is, the thing that made me want to do it was I had presented my first talk at Western Mass Drupal Camp that the December before, and I enjoyed kind of contributing what I knew back, and I thought it would be kind of a fun way to kind of share my experience with Drupal at the time. I mean, since then, this changed. It's still a contribution, but I learned so much from our guests and guest hosts that I think I get just as much from the show as we provide. But yeah, I mean, I didn't go into it with any real knowledge of what a podcast was or what kind of commitment it would take or how long it would be such a big part of my life.
Okay. I just want to say that your face is getting cut in half while you're leaning forward.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
It's a little bit different when I'm not the
Okay.
one. I'm not. Yeah, give me a second. Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
All
that
right.
it's funny because now I'm the one that does most of the editing, so I usually pay attention to that stuff. But when Steven was the one that did the editing, he was
Uh-huh.
always he was always sending me messages like, "Hey, you're leaning in too far." So I have to get used to being the one being recorded again rather than the one doing the recording. How's that?
That's nice. Okay, one more. So I lost you there. What was I about to ask? I had a question in my mind right at the moment. And, and okay, so do you love this doing the podcast? Did you grow into
Yeah,
it?
I mean, I don't think you can do anything for 12 years every
Without
single
loving?
week for multiple hours if you don't love it, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there's none of us are directly paid for it, right? On some level,
Mm-hmm.
it's a work of passion. You know, we want to contribute back to the community. It's become an important way um, to for like I said, I feel like I get as much out of it as maybe other people because it's a way for me to also hear what the community is thinking about, talking about. You know, we get the opportunity to talk about a lot of cutting edge stuff, and so I think just being able to interact on that level is the piece that really stands out for me.
Okay. All right. So this like you are a host, but other than that, what particular uh, part of the podcast are you taking care of? Are you taking care of the guests? Are you taking care of the editing part or the post production, whatever it is? What is it that you are specializing in at the moment?
Yeah, no, so I do not take care. Well, I mean, I don't take care of finding and scheduling. That's John.
Mm-hmm.
So the parts that I do is I help make sure that it's being recorded. I help make sure I do the editing.
Mm-hmm.
I post everything except
Mm-hmm.
for social media. So I make sure, so I'm the one that posts the final edited video to YouTube. I post the audio to Patreon. I post the audio to Libsyn, which is where kind of the podcast gets distributed from. Um, I put together the final show notes that show up on the website and post to the
Mm-hmm.
website. Um, Steven handles uh, Steven handles all the social media and the newsletter. And
Mm-hmm.
then John handles scheduling guests, guest hosts, and putting together the pre-show notes. And then all of us contribute kind of to the questions sometimes. John does most of the brainstorming for that piece. And then the rest of us kind of handle adding additional questions. And then Martin um, handles coming up with modules of the week. I mean, you just spoke to him, so you probably know that. Um, and then of course Martin's become a pretty integral part of the show, and you know, he drops in as a host or a guest host fairly often, maybe every couple of months or something. So that's what I
So
do,
yeah, just
mostly
mention
editing.
yeah, just because you mentioned Martin, do you remember the time the episode that Martin came on board as the correspondent? He doesn't remember it.
Oh, I don't remember the exact episode, but if I do know, what happened was, so here's what happens. Um, we have guest hosts on the show now. We've been doing that for I think 2 years, almost 3 years now. And when we add a guest host, we add them to our Slack channel. And
Okay.
um, guest hosts are welcome to stay in the Slack channel even after their time is up.
Yeah.
And so the way that we did module of the week almost from the beginning of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And we would always jump on and be like, okay, what are we going to talk about this week? And John and Steven and I, and at the time Jason was a host and so was Jay, but we would look at our projects and be like, oh, we use this module this week, it was kind of fun, let's talk about it. And then
Mm-hmm.
over time we started having trouble coming up with stuff, so we stopped doing module of the week for a long time, for
Mm-hmm.
probably about 100 episodes. Then John was always a huge fan of module of the week, so he pitched to bring it back, I think around somewhere in the 200s.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started doing it again. But we
Mm-hmm.
quickly fell into the same habit. We started, we'd jump on the show before we recorded. We'd be like, okay, what are we going to talk about this week? And we just started pulling random modules that we had never used and just talking
Mm-hmm.
about them. So fast forward, Martin was guest host in episodes 336 through 339.
Mm-hmm.
And every single week, when we'd start talking about, okay, let's do this module, Martin would be like, oh, I have an idea. How about this one? And so I think 3 out of the 4 weeks he was guest host, we used a module that he suggested.
Uh-huh.
Then he stayed in the Slack channel and he just kept like sending us modules. Like, how about this one? How about this one next week? How about this one? And so finally, we have John, Steven, and I have quarterly-ish meetings. So every quarter or so, we meet and talk about the show.
Mhm.
Talking Drupal, you could say, just to be like, hey, this format's working, this isn't, who should we try to get as a guest, what topic should we do, that kind of thing. And um, I remember it being me, but it may not have been. We were talking about module of the week and whether or not we should continue it because we were having so much trouble
Mhm.
coming up with ideas. And we were like, Martin keeps sending us ideas, even though he's not on the show anymore. Should we approach him about, I don't even think we called it correspondent at the time, but should we approach Martin and ask him if he would be willing to be part of the show like that? So I don't know exactly when he started as a correspondent, but we can look at his we added a new feature to the site where you can look at a user that's been on the show, a person that's been on the show, and we post their role for that show.
Mhm.
And so if we look at Martin's, his first spot as a correspondent was episode 371,
Mhm.
which was in the module was entity comparison, apparently. So, and that episode came out 2022, so October 2022. So I think
Okay.
it looks like it started, his guest host spot ended on 339, and it was about 40 weeks later. So almost a year. But
Yeah. 40 weeks later. That would be 40 episodes, right? 40 weeks later means 40
yeah.
episodes. That would be
And
like
who knows how
378.
many he suggested in between,
Yeah.
because like I said, he kept sending us ideas for module of the week.
All right.
And yeah, he's been a great addition to the show.
Wonderful, wonderful. Do you remember how you came up with the name Talking Drupal?
I have no idea.
No.
Steven came to us with it. So the one regret I have about the show is this. In the beginning, Steven did everything.
Yeah.
We,
And
he would say, hey, we're recording this time. Everybody would show up. He'd be like, here are, we would sometimes look at the show notes beforehand, usually on before we started recording.
mhm.
So we would contribute a little bit there. We would sometimes give him ideas, things like that. But Steven did everything. We would show up, we would record, he would edit, he would release it, and that was it. Um, so and that extended to him building this original site. That extended to him coming up with the name, everything. It took us far, far too long to start to split up the responsibilities. But as for the name, I have no idea. I know Steven has done some past and was experimenting with it for a long time, but yeah, I don't know where he came up with the name.
Fun fact is, even he
It's
don't remember.
Drupal, and we're talking about it.
Yeah, it's quite it's obvious in a way. It's Drupal we're gonna talk
I,
about. So
I,
it's like,
yeah, I,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I honestly don't know where. I like the name. I love the name. No idea where
Uh-huh.
it came from.
You're right. So I just wanted to ask, so 12 years is quite a long time for a podcast to run. And you've been in the podcast since the very beginning. You've been a part of it. I understand Stephen took care of most part until the 300th episode. But did you ever feel burned out in the whole process? It's a long process, obviously. I
So
think there is a
burnout is
network
some.
issue. Hello, Nick?
Hello?
Hello?
Hey, sorry about that. Zoom
Yeah, it's okay.
crashed. So you had asked me about burnout.
Yeah.
Okay, so we meet, like I had mentioned, we meet every quarter or so. And the truth is, we usually cancel every other meeting. So we really just meet twice a year, give or take. Um, One of the biggest things we talk about is burnout on the and that's one of the reasons. So Steven is still very much part of the show, but I think that's one of the reasons why he stepped back from being a host, because he burned out. He had too much. He was doing too much, and that's why I regret not stepping up sooner and dividing the labor, because maybe things would have been different. Now, it did bring us to the idea of guest hosts, which I think is the best thing that we've done for the show, having guest hosts. Now, back to burnout. It is something I've struggled with, and I won't speak for John, but I'm sure you'll ask him the same question. I struggle with is it is a large commitment. Just to give you an idea for the show, we record on Tuesday. The recording starts at 11:30 and ends around 1. But I usually have to jump on beforehand, 15 minutes beforehand or so. I edit the show on Fridays, and that takes usually about 2.5 hours. So that's 4 hours, give or take, a week of just interacting with the podcast itself. Never, not community oriented stuff, just interacting with the podcast. Editing. I I enjoy editing, but it's not a passion, right? And so that part sometimes gets hard. So one of the things that we've started working on is implementing a 2-week break twice a year for both John and I.
Okay.
So Stephen has agreed or maybe not, but we try to fill it and do 2 episode things that give John and I a break, sometime in July-ish and sometime in December-ish. Although this year we're doing the break in May for some reason. I don't remember. Maybe we agreed on 3 breaks a year. I don't remember exactly. But the idea is to give us a couple weeks off where we don't have to do everything with the show and we have a breather. And I found that is kind of crucial, because I find, like, right about now, I'm getting towards the end where, like, I've been going straight for 25 weeks or so. And I'm posting the show later and later on Fridays because I'm getting busier and busier. And so I'm looking forward to the break. But once the break is over, I'm ready to get back in. I can't wait to get back to the show. Like, I love the show, but I want it to be sustainable long term.
Great. Okay. So, coming back, 12 years is a long time. And how would you comment on the reception of the show? It's like when you began, it would have been a very limited circle, but how has it grown over the years? Do you have more members coming, more people talking?
Yeah. So obviously our audience has grown over the years. And I think I attribute a lot of that to the fact two big changes. One is we started having more guests
Yeah.
at some point. Like in the beginning, we would have a guest every like 5 or 6 episodes, right? Over time, we started having more guests. And in fact, now it's rare. It's very rare that we don't have a guest on a given week. And I think having somebody else's perspective where it's more of an interview format, I think is much more interesting, to be honest. The other big change is the guest host. So having another perspective outside and giving the guest hosts their own episode means that it's much more it's much more unique. We get a unique perspective. So I think those two things have really contributed to the growth. As far as reception, early on, there wasn't, like I said, podcasts really weren't around, so there wasn't a lot of like host and audience interaction. I think in the beginning, the most we had was actually with the Google, what was it called? Google Plus. We used to be on Google Plus, which was a social media platform from Google, and we had some interaction there. Now most of our our audience interacts with us on Slack. We have a Slack channel for Talking Drupal, and people join there. We've got let's see, 350 people in the channel.
Oh.
We post the episodes there and people chat about it. And whenever we have a guest host, I always make sure to add them so that we can welcome them to the community. But yeah, no, it's definitely been growing.
Great to know that. So does people recognize you from your voice when you go to DrupalCons or camps, Yeah, you're the person in Talking Drupal.
Yeah, I remember, in fact, one of the first times I realized that people listen to the podcast was at Ned Camp. I was talking to John, I think. I was walking to some session, and Rob Oben, who works at Oomph, came up to me and said, "Hey Nick, how you doing?" And I was like, "I'm sorry, what's your name? I don't recognize you." He's like, "Oh, we met." He's like, my name's Rob. It's fine. My name's Rob." And I was like, I felt bad. I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't remember meeting you, but moved on. Sometimes that happens." And then we started eating lunch, and he comes up to me and goes, "Hey, Nick, I realized we haven't met. It's just I listened to the podcast. And so because I know who you are, I thought that we had met." And that was kind of the first time somebody knew me from the podcast came up to me. And, it's a funny little story, but yeah, ever since then, people sometimes when I'm at a camp or something, I'm talking to John and somebody does a double take, like, I recognize that voice. And it's always good to meet people that listen to the show and hear what they like about it.
Yeah, Martin calls that his sonic personality. People understands his sonic personality when some people recognizes his voice. Like, are you that dude from Talking Drupal? It's interesting, right? You get that celebrity vibe.
Yeah,
So,
it
yeah.
stands out.
Yeah, moving on. So pioneered episodes. What do you feel about that? Like, genuinely, how happy do you feel of reaching 500th episode?
I am very proud of reaching 500 episodes because it's a milestone. It feels like a lot of pressure, right? Usually, every 100 episodes, we invite Dries on. We have a discussion with him. We kind of reflect a little bit on the past 100 episodes, and that's it. 500 feels like a bigger milestone. So I'm very happy with what we came up with, but we met a couple of times to come up with the idea. It's really heartwarming to see the community respond, and we're very grateful to the DropTimes for being willing to showcase it. It feels like I'm very excited. It also feels like a lot of pressure. But yeah, I think the average podcast goes for like 6 episodes or 8 episodes or something. So
500 is such a big number.
Yeah, to be honest, I find it easier because we do it every week.
Yeah.
And that does contribute to burnout on some level, which is why we try to integrate those breaks. But in the beginning, I think it was a lot harder because it would we weren't as scheduled. And a lot of that had to do with, John and I not contributing as much. So once we split up the workload, it became easier to be like, okay, we record once a week, we release once a week. And, when you get into a rhythm, it's easy to keep going.
Great. So do you have any favorite episodes, something that stands out that you remember particularly or something of that sort? I know it's a tricky question, but do you have any?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you 2. I mean, one is
Okay.
always the next episode, right? The next episode that's coming out it's funny because so we record the episode on Tuesday, I edit on Friday, right? And so I hear the episode a second time before it comes out. And then the next episode comes up and it's a new topic. And I'm always excited to see who we're talking to, what the guest host is going to come up with. I remember one time I edited them out of order. So last year, the way we had the break, we ended up recording a second one, and then editing. And it was just so hard because the most recent wasn't fresh.
Okay.
If I had to pick some of the top moments. I would say one that has impacted me a ton and isn't even directly related to Drupal. We had an episode where we talked about um, being more green as developers
Mm-hmm.
and how we need to consider things like how performant a site is because it's operating on so many devices, but
Mm-hmm.
also consider the developer's time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because developers have an impact. My computer is far more powerful than an average consumer's computer or cell phone. And it just got me really thinking about finding the line where I spend more time making something more optimized versus doing something, making it easier for me to maintain versus making it run more efficiently, right? Because both of those have an impact on how green, quote unquote, your website is. The other one would probably be the first time we had Dries on. It was fun because it made us, that was the first time we did something where it was like, oh, maybe people are listening to the show, because before he joined, we didn't have a lot of statistics. We didn't have
Mm-hmm.
any way for people listening to the show to communicate with us beyond email.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we invited him and he agreed to come on, we were like, hey, maybe people do listen to the show. So those two are always fun. I know what John's going
Great.
to say, but I'll let you ask him.
Okay. So I would like to ask, so it's a very huge initiative. As you mentioned, it's running on passion, not like you are looking for the financial gain here. And it has been quite a very, how would I say, it's something that people listen to so they can get constantly updated with Drupal. So do you have any particular stories of impact from talking Drupal that someone has come up to you and said that so and so things have made a change in how I perceive Drupal, or it helped me open a career in Drupal, or any other experiences that actually made you think, oh, this podcast has an actual impact among the audience, the listeners?
Yeah, I think, people have certainly let us know how much it means to them and that it helps them keep up to date, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's kind of three ways that generally we hear that happens.
Mm-hmm.
One is Martin's piece, right? Module of the week. All the time, people are like, hey, I never knew about that module. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad I listened to the show for that, right? We hear that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, I've had people talk about, we also had that mini series where with Chad Hester,
Mm-hmm.
where he kind of, coming from a Drupal 7 background, got some training and mentorship to get
Drupal, yeah.
more up to speed on modern Drupal, right?
Okay.
And I think that impacted him directly because he was able to kind of transition back from a more architectural role to a developer role,
Mm-hmm.
because now he understands modern Drupal,
Mm-hmm.
having only developed in Drupal 7 before. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that really, I think that impacted him, or at least I hope it did. And then the other way is, uh, we do a lot of shows on accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the other ones that really stood out to me was we did one with Rain. Let me look up the name. Give me one second. Rain Michaels,
Hmm.
and episode 316. It's just in October of 2021. That that one actually probably changed my life the most. Hearing
Okay.
how she talked about the way that you need to consider accessibility. I mean, I had always tried to hit like accessibility targets for my clients before that,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know, something about that episode just really changed the way that I think about accessibility for the web. It came from something that it's part of something I have to do to one of the first things I think about when building a site. Um, so I think having so many shows about that and giving people the opportunity to hear how that impacts them personally
Mm-hmm.
really helps the audience of the show prioritize that as well. And I like to think that that helps the whole web, right? The more accessible the web is, the better.
Yeah, okay. That's wonderful. So, over the course of 12 years, have you tried to change anything with talking Drupal? Like maybe this would have been a better option, but it might not have worked out in the long run. But did you have any suggestions or something you had in mind that you would have loved to implement of some sort?
Yes, I mean, we, we've always made changes. I mean, if you go back and listen to the early episodes, the quality of our recording equipment is pretty poor.
Uh-huh.
If you look at me in particular, many times I was recording from a Starbucks. So so the audio quality was pretty bad. So I think the first enhancement we did was getting things like this mic and a mixer and better equipment,
Okay.
right? Um, we didn't experiment early on. I think the biggest thing I wish, there are two things that we've done that I wish we had done earlier is,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, dividing up the labor is something we should have thought to do hundreds of episodes before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the second thing that I think took us far too long to figure out was how important guests were. Um, like I said, guests used to just be like, hey, if we thought about it, like it was almost like when we had the guests, they were the primary focus, but having a guest was kind of an afterthought, I feel like. And in the past few years, it's really become more intentional. Like every episode generally needs to have a guest. Um, every episode generally has to have a block for a guest host, and those two things are the biggest changes. We've also done, and this is in the past couple of years, like I said, implementing the break. But part of implementing that break is giving us an opportunity to experiment with other types of show, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the original show with Chad was one of those experiments. Um, Steven did the interview with John and I recently, and that
Mm-hmm.
was one of those experiments. We have another one coming up that Steven has. Steven has an idea. I don't know if we've announced it publicly yet, but coming up towards May, we have another idea to fill this 2-week hole. And so we're actively looking for additional little maybe vignettes or 2-week series and things to fill. And if one of them is particularly successful, maybe it grows into something bigger. Um, but maintaining the main show is enough work
Mm-hmm.
without adding a second or third show to the network.
Great, great. So this is the question. So what happens when a guest doesn't show
Pure chaos. Um,
up?
so you would think that that would be a bigger problem, right? Considering we have a
Okay.
guest every week, but
Yeah.
really, I think it's only happened 2 or 3 times.
Uh-huh.
And I think one of those times the person realized right before, like they had some sort of family emergency, I think, or something. And so they sent us a message and said, we can't make it. So we just prepared. The time it's been a little bit more fun, we'll say, is when the guest just didn't show up and didn't respond to
Oh,
messages.
oh.
And so then you're stuck like, okay, do we wait for them long? Like how long do we wait? Um, Nowadays we have off the cuff, or we've called it this and that in the past. We basically just, every person that's on the show, we come up with 3 or 4 topics, like mini topics to talk about. And then we go through the list and pick the top 3 or 4 that we think is best, and we talk about it. So those shows end up being a little bit more variety. Like we'll talk about a
Mm-hmm.
new tool we're using, we'll talk about a project we're working on. Um, they tend to be pretty popular, except when we end up having them more than once every few months. Like there
Mm-hmm.
was an unlucky stretch last year where like 2 months in a row a guest didn't show up, I
Mm.
think, and so we had 2 in a row, and the second one wasn't quite as popular. That being said, um we don't actually track the analytics of the show very closely. Like we're not we're doing it to have the discussion with the guests and the guest host and interact with the community. We're not, and we'll look at overall trends and things like that, but we're not like, hey, last week's episode didn't perform very well. We need to figure out what we're going to do. We never look at it that way. But for example, we knew before it came out, we knew that the Drupal CMS episode we had at the beginning of the year was going to be very popular, right? Just because Drupal CMS was very exciting, it had just come out. So we watched that one a little bit closely, but we're never looking at the show like, what are the performers? What are the expected views? What's the expected listen time? We never look at it that way. It's always about the topic.
Okay. So any particular proud contributions to the podcast? Something that you call you're on?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Any particular proud contributions, like one specific contribution that is full? It has written Nick Laflin all over it. Some sort of like things like that.
I would say two things. One is I like to take credit for the idea of guest host, although I think John and Stephen dispute that. I think all of us individually take credit for it. I mean, it is collaborative. We're always meeting about it. But the other thing is, this isn't even that big, but Steve and I rebuilt, and Martin helped. We rebuilt the website about a year ago on Drupal 10. And adding the guest tab so that we can see who's been on the show and when. I mean, Steven's told me this too a few times. It is so convenient. It's so nice to see who's been on the show. It's so nice to see the list. I mean, we've got, over 100 guests at this point. That's something that I put together kind of just because on a whim. Like we used to have like an admin view that you could kind of see it, but it wasn't super helpful. But yeah, that's something I put together.
Yeah. So I think I've pretty much covered everything here. I was trying not to repeat the same questions I've asked Stephen. Like I'm trying to grab everything from everyone. So yeah, that's pretty much, and I've taken up almost 11 minutes more than I've asked for. So do you have anything extra to add? Do you have anything special to say other than the questions I've asked?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing is I don't. There's a couple of actually, you know what? There's one other thing that I'm really proud of that I helped implement, and that is we provide credit on Drupal.org for every guest and every guest host that's on the show. Well, and the hosts too. So John, Stephen, and I, and Martin all get credit for each episode that we're on and contribute to, which is every single episode. So I'm very proud to be able to give credit back because many times it's people's first credit. You know, it's their first way to see that they've contributed back to the Drupal project. I will say, I don't foresee ending anytime soon, right? I mean, the show, it's funny. You had asked, one of the first questions you had asked was, when we started the show, what were my thoughts? And I remember this wasn't right when it started, but maybe 6 months in, I was like, what are we going to do? We're going to run out of things to talk about, right? Eventually, we're going to run out of things to talk about. And I know John puts in a lot of work finding guests and guest hosts. I mean, he's probably puts in as much work as I do editing, because scheduling and coming up with ideas, that's a lot of work. I'm glad he's doing that, not me. But it's hard, based on how we've been doing this for the last 12 years. Now the question is, how do we have time to talk to everybody we want to talk to? Like, of course, there's some people that have been on the show many times, but there's so many people that are so important to the community that we just haven't had a chance to talk to yet. We haven't had the privilege to talk to them yet because we only do one episode a week. Now, there's no way I can do 2 episodes or more a week. So we have to stay with 1 a week. But I just can't wait to talk to everybody. I mean, it's always a great conversation. It's always great to have people on to talk about what they're doing. I can't wait to see what the future brings. But yeah, I never thought I'd be here 12 years later.